Good evening, Bret. Thanks so very much for being here with us. Really appreciate it always. It was important for us to have you here because tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we've gone in a different direction for the MirYam Institute. We typically bring policymakers, elected officials, but this year we wanted to bring people deeply involved in the events that have escorted or by which the people of Israel have been escorted, whether they be Israelis or whether they be American Jews or Jews throughout the diaspora. That's why we heard from Boris Stonder. Thank you so much again, Boris. And that is the reason that we wanted to bring you, because you are not only somebody who passes comment, but you are also somebody who uses exceptional, unparalleled powers of expression, of probity, of sincerity and courage in order to fashion and to shape not only the considerations of those who agree with you, but more importantly, in order to put the right to the lies that so many live by who read other media, other voices. And I applaud you and I thank you on behalf of everyone here for all that you do, Bret. So your views about President Trump are well known. Everybody's aware of them who reads your column.
What are they?
So what I'd like to know is not what you thought prior to the election, but what you want to see from the Trump administration in terms of policy toward Israel and the Middle East. Let's start there, and then we'll move to the unrest that we all witnessed on the university campuses recently.
Well, the first thing I want to say is how honored I am to be. Is this working? How honored I am to be here, and how little I feel I have to contribute after just listening to Boris, and what an extraordinary occasion it is to have you and Almog and Mossab and your other guests here. With respect to my views of the president-elect, I wish him well. You know, I guess I was a charter member of the Never Trump gang or crew or whatever, but that ship, that ship sailed. And what I want is a successful presidency. I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for his administration. And what I'd like to see, above all, is an America that understands that the sacrifices that someone like Boris has made on behalf of the state of Israel are actually sacrifices that are being made also, by extension, on behalf of the entire free world. Anyone who cares about the distinction between civilization and barbarism, between free societies and totalitarian or theocratic societies, owes an enormous debt to him. And now, President-elect Trump is going to be the most important man in the free world. And so what I'd like to see, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, is that he understands the moment that we're in. We're in a moment very much like the 1930s, in which totalitarian or authoritarian powers are not just rising, they're not just ambitious, they're not just sensing opportunities, as Mr. Putin did in Mariupol and Donbass, and Sinwar did on October 7th, but also in China, and Korean Peninsula, and elsewhere. And they're combining forces. You know, people often ask, you know, when did World War II begin? It began when the tripartite agreement was signed between Japan, Italy, and Germany. And now we have a no limits agreement, no limit to friendship agreement between China and Russia, an alliance between Iran and Russia. I mean, this is happening again. So President Trump needs to understand that can't just be America first, it has to be the free world first. And that our friends on the front lines of the free world are fighting our battles for us right now, whether it's the Ukrainians fighting desperately near Kharkiv, or the IDF in the Golan, in Lebanon, and in Gaza. That's what I'd like to see from the administration. And some of the signals are great. I think someone like Secretary of State to be Marco Rubio understands that. I hope the rest of the team understands that as well.
So you spoke about the alliance, for example, between Russia and Iran. Now, those are two enfeebled countries militarily at this time. And how do you think, in light of that, President Trump ought to be looking to concretely press the advantage there?
Well, when you've got you've kicked a bad guy to the ground, keep kicking. That's my view. I don't think that. I think it would be a great shame, for example, if we, the United States, were to force the Ukrainians to make a humiliating deal when Russia's weaknesses have been exposed. Russia, even though Ukraine appears to be the weaker party, Russia is also teetering. I mean, it says something about Russian power that they have to call in several thousand North Koreans to help shore up their position, or that they have to import drones from Iran, a third-rate technological power, to attack them. So I'm not quite sure what the Trump administration has in mind, but if I understand one thing about Trump, is he hates losing. And so I would say to him is, don't turn Ukraine into your Afghanistan. Don't allow a situation to occur in which Kyiv could fall in the same way that that Kabul fell in 2021, because it's going to hurt everyone. And with respect to Iran, the Iranians may be racing right now towards a nuclear capability, what's called a breakout capability. And what I'd love to see on Truth Social, President Trump say something like, Iran's evil leaders can have their regime or nuclear weapons. They can't have both. And if they go for a bomb, we're going to go for them, in the way that Israel went for Nasrallah and Sinwar and Khania in Tehran. I think that message now will get through to the Supreme Leader in a way that it might not have 6 months ago, now that he's seen his constellation of buddies bite the dust.
There is a mixed bag there in some of the Trump, the individuals that President-elect Trump has tapped for key roles. And Marco Rubio is someone that I think the pro-Israel community would be very supportive of as Secretary of State. But you've also you have a growing isolationist wing within that party. And the example of that isolationism flies in the face of what you would like to see with regard to Ukraine. But there are hints that it might actually encompass America's relationship with Israel as well. How do you see that tension playing out, if you think there is that tension?
Well, this is one of the things that always worried me about, certainly when Trump first came on the scene, which is that if you're going to have a broadly isolationist policy when it comes to other countries, but carve out an exception for Israel because Jared's your son-in-law, right? Eventually that exception is going to go away. And the Republican Party has to stand for the party of freedom. It has to stand as the party of peace through strength, because I don't see the Democratic Party filling that role, and I think it's filled that role for decades. And so that always concerned me. And there's no question, whether it's some of the rhetoric coming from the vice president-elect, that the only border he cares about is the southern border. You can care about both, by the way, just as Jerry Ford can walk and chew gum at the same time. So you have it from J.D. Vance, you have it from people like Rand Paul. Tucker Carlson is, let's face it, a powerful ideological force in Trump land. And so what I'd like the president-elect to understand is that their counsel is for America losing. And if I understand the president's basic instinct correctly, it's that he wants to win, 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 win. So win, 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 win does not look like Kyiv falling. It does not look like Israel being forced into a feckless ceasefire. It doesn't look like our allies in Asia being bullied and kicked about by the Chinese. This is a moment for him to step up. We have a big problem, by the way, which is that despite the aggregate numbers or the raw numbers, We are spending less on defense as a percentage of GDP than we ever have in really the post-Cold War history. Less than 3% of GDP on defense. And what we've seen is that some of our adversaries can use asymmetric means to defeat, aircraft carrier battle groups and all the kind of expensive and exquisite forces that we've developed over the years very easily. We don't want to be the victims of another Pearl Harbor. We don't want to have another battleship row lying on the bottom of a harbor. So we have to move very aggressively to restart or restore our deterrent power against some of our adversaries.
So one more question on that, and then I'll change topics slightly. Israel never gets a break, right? Israel never gets a break. We've fought inside Gaza for more than a year. We fought inside Lebanon. We began doing so with what can be described, I would say, as defensive offense, perhaps, if you'll agree with that term. Maybe you've got a better term. And then we started to push our advantage with great achievements by the Israel Defense Forces inside southern Lebanon. And just as we seem to be dealing with our two enemies there, emerges a vacuum in Syria, in part because of Israel's successes. I don't think that there's much question about that. And the president-elect has said, contrary to what you would like him to say perhaps, let it play out, right? Let it play out. Do you see it differently? And also, of course, Israel can't afford to let that play out and isn't letting it play out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, in the last 48 hours, Israel has destroyed the remnants of the Syrian army, absolutely correctly. Because, look, the simple truth is that nobody knows what HTS, this Organization for the Liberation of the Levant, whether they're practicing taqiyya and deception and they're just claiming to have abandoned their previous ties to radical jihad.
But if you had to put your money on it?
Well, if I had to put my money on it, I think they will not become another Taliban regime. Because that's a road to failure. And I think they may understand, and of course, there's a good chance I could be wrong. You're just asking a speculative question, right? They may understand that they will not be able to govern Syria if they propose to govern the way the Taliban governs Afghanistan. The Kurds won't allow it. They're the lead group, but there are at least a dozen other rebel groups that participated in the liberation of Damascus. Look, fundamentally, this is a very good thing, what happened in Syria, because it broke the biggest and strongest link in the chain, literally connecting by land bridge Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's a very good thing because the Assad regime was unparalleled in its cruelty, and you're seeing pictures of people being, I mean, any one of us who has, thinks of people like Sharansky, there were political prisoners in Tadmor and other prisons in Syria that were horrifically mistreated, and so at least there's an opportunity. Now, whether that opportunity turns out to be something fruitful, we don't know yet, but what we do know is that Assad was a terrible actor, among the worst actors, and the best ally that Khamenei ever had. So let's see if we can seize this opportunity. What I would propose in Syria is this. Let's say to the new regime, okay, as a gesture of goodwill, we're going to take this character, al-Jolani, he's called, off of our wanted list. But we're not going to take HTS off the terrorism list, and we're not going to take sanctions off of Syria until we see certain things. Is there freedom of religion? Can Christians worship in churches, right? Can women dress as they please? Will they help us or hinder us in the fight against ISIS? And will they kick the Russians out of their bases in Latakia and elsewhere? And if they do these things, we can have a new relationship with them, as the Israelis can, and take advantage of this to isolate Hezbollah, further isolate the Iranians, and by the way, inspire the Iranian people to follow in the footsteps of what the Syrian people have just achieved.
So let's turn to, by the way, it's a curious thing, Bret, right? The international community, in the wake of tremendous unrest and unpredictability in Syria never gathers together in the UN and says, we know exactly what needs to be done here. Partition Damascus, divide up the land according to religious and various sects, and in that way there'll be peace, throughout the land. But in Israel, that same community is absolutely certain that it knows exactly what resolution they need to bring to the ongoing conflict.
Just leave aside the international community, a phrase I detest. There is no international community. It has no authority. It has no legitimacy. We have to put that to one side. But you've just jogged my mind. I cannot think in the last 13 years in which an Arab people rose up against a tyrannical regime, a single protest at Columbia or Berkeley or Harvard or any of our supposedly elite universities standing in solidarity with the besieged and beleaguered people of Aleppo or Hama or Homs or elsewhere. Not once. No. Not once. I mean, if you want a clear demonstration of the double standard and the anti-Semitism fundamentally at work in all of the campus demonstrations that we've seen over the last 14 or 15 months, nothing demonstrates that more clearly. And sometimes people will say, well, you see, we're opposed to Israel because we support Israel. A nonsensical argument if you're protesting in Sydney or Montreal, but I've never seen a single protest against what the Turks are doing to the Kurds, and we're providing the Turks with F-16s and a nuclear umbrella. Not one. Mm. They have an objection to one state, and it just happens to be the Jewish state.
So on that subject, when I first started working here in the United States, it was actually, I'll go back further. When I first visited the U.S. as a teenager, I and my brother, we were amazed. We came to this part of New York, and we were amazed, it was Hanukkah time, by the fact that Jews would proudly display their Chanukiah in their store window and do so without fear. And if they do so this year, I don't think that they're doing it as a sign of openness. I think they're doing so perhaps more as a sign of defiance. We've seen what's going on the university campuses. Those students will be policymakers. I'm concerned that the golden age of American Jewry is over. What can you dispel about that presumption? How can you dispel some of the darkness surrounding the lot and the future of American Jewry?
Well, I worry about it both for American Jews as well as for America itself. I mean, one of the reasons that America prospered the way it did is that this was a country that was uniquely receptive to Jewish success in the way that England never was, or Canada, other countries. Why? Paradoxically, if you want to know the history, it's because the Pilgrims, the Puritans, brought along a Calvinist doctrine. John Calvin, an anti-Semitic preacher from Geneva, believed in the idea that worldly success was a sign of divine favor. And so people who succeeded in the United States and groups that succeeded in the United States weren't envied or hated, they were admired. And so long as success was met with admiration in the United States, successful minorities like Jews prospered here. But in the past 20 years, we've replaced this concept of success with this word privilege. And the suggestion when it comes to privilege is the idea that it's unearned, it's unfair. That if you have privilege, it should be taken from you. So no surprise that even if this idea of privilege isn't anti-Semitic on its face, it's anti-Semitic adjacent. And it helps explain why some of the kind of theories that have developed on campuses and the politics that have developed on campus, even if they didn't emerge from an anti-Semitic, an explicitly anti-Semitic origin, blossomed into a kind of anti-Semitism. My biggest fear isn't merely that anti-Semitism is resurgent here. It's that Americans are giving up on the values that made this a good country for Jews. Free speech, as opposed to the culture of cancellation. Free enterprise, as opposed to a mentality of socialism. This belief that we should be judged by the content of our character, as opposed to the relentless identity politics that typifies so much of political and cultural life. A whole set touchstone values that we used to associate with the essence of America are under assault. Now, the good news is that I think for American Jews, we don't simply and shouldn't plead our case as a kind of a member of the DEI constellation, right? That whole rubric is fraudulent and wrong. What we should do is remind other Americans that if they value these quintessential American values, they should treasure their country's Jewish population. I mean, they should treasure other, all kinds of people, but those values are the ones in which all of us flourish. And so when people talk about, well, what kind of alliances should American Jews have, whether it should be with evangelical Christians or maybe with Asians bonding over complaints about affirmative action, our alliance isn't with other ethnic groups. Our alliance is with those bedrock American values, and we have to make that case. American Jews, I think, in the long run, are going to be fine because as the Columbias of the world turn on us, we're going to create or discover or reinvent other institutions and make them the envies of the world. Commercial banking wasn't nice to us. We created investment banking, not a problem. Now everyone wants to be investment banking. We've gone private, right? One institution after another, when Jews weren't welcomed, we learned, we're not going to sit at your table. We're going to sit at our own table and give it a few years. That will soon be the cool kids' table. And then everyone else will screw it up. But that's why I have faith that the string has not fully run out for American Jews.
Well, Bret Stephens, thank you so much. Thank you for educating all of us. We appreciate it.